All right, so I've got a huge stack of papers here, and this is actually the beginning of the transcript for my upcoming poetry anthology. I've also got these two full notebooks with poetry. My upcoming poetry anthology, I Can't See the Sunrise. And this is essentially a book about how the world has changed since COVID and since 2020. And it is not like a political thing, or it's not really trying to get into the nitty gritty of, you know, mental health or neuroscience. It's more so getting into the felt experience that we've all been going through, where it seems like time is speeding up. It seems like we don't really have the space in our lives anymore for ourselves and for each other, for our relationships. And there's this just underlying dread and anxiety that has bubbled up to the surface that we're aware of, but we don't really want to talk about or get into. And, I know this is changing because as the trends online show, we've been moving away from the hyper curated, like YouTuber influencer era where everything was all about perfect scripts and perfect lighting and sound and videos. And people are now just like picking up their phones and doing monologues on camera about how much life actually sucks. And, people are much less apt to look for the, comfortable, feel good distractions that kind of um, characterize the peak, I guess, like YouTuber influencer era from like the mid 2010s to like the very early 2020s. And in the past few years, that has just totally transitioned into just people being authentic. And so I'll just briefly go over the intro here. I Can't Remember the Sunrise is a poetry collection on anxiety, isolation, grief, and longing in the post-COVID digital age, saturated with social media, short form, and AI-generated content, rising political polarization, economic hardships, and us, imperfect humans caught in the crossfire of it all. This book is not one of grand explanations of the present or the predictions of the future, nor is it a prescriptive guide for self-improvement or political activism. This book is an invitation to put down the phone and settle into the feelings and thoughts we've all been struggling to name and frantically running away from through endless distractions, doom scrolling, and digitized drama. As the world seems to be changing faster than any of us ever imagined possible, we look at our own lives, which somehow seem to be caught in stasis, a slow decline as day-to-day life gets harder and harder. This book is an invitation to return to yourself in an age that seeks, above all, to pull you away from your humanity. And, I went on to write a little bit more on that by hand, but I'm not going to get super into that. There are some topics in here that I wanted to cover that I think are important. I did say I'm not getting into the nitty gritty of mental health. That was a word salad. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to be talking about like specific studies or, the neuroscience mechanisms behind why things are happening. When I'm writing this book, it's more so about I want to address issues that I think all of us have dealt with in one way or another. And mental health happens to be part of that because obviously, we've all dealt with the increased anxiety of living in the post-COVID era. We all feel this inability to really see hope for the future. There's a huge shift away from people having like big, flashy dreams and just simply wanting to survive. That's a major change that's happened. We all feel very isolated in this new world because even though we're more connected than ever before, one thing that COVID did is it kind of retrained all of us to get hyper fixated on our screens. And now, even though we don't necessarily have to do that anymore, we can't really seem to stop ourselves from spending way more time than we would like on our devices. And the other thing too is that this book gets into grief. Obviously there's the loss of the world that we grew up in that is no longer there and is definitely not going to be coming back. But there's also the actual loss of, loved ones. Like, one thing that has been really bad is that for people my age, younger people, there's been a huge suicide epidemic. And I lost my best friend back in 2023 to suicide. And so there's going to be a lot of poems in here addressing those feelings of loss and longing for, my best friend. And I think that a lot of people will be able to relate to that. Then in 2024, another one of my old acquaintances from high school passed away. Because the other thing too is that suicide is one way in which younger people are dying, but there's also an increase in chronic health conditions. There's an increase in cancers. There's all sorts of things happening that weren't happening before that are causing people to die at higher rates. Then there's obviously this sense of despair that, things just seem to be getting worse and worse, and we're kind of going in this doom spiral. I didn't mention that in the intro, but I think that the climate itself is a huge issue. And I'm not going to get super into that in this particular book. That's actually for another project that is specifically focused on the collapsing ecology, and that is called Grieving Eden. That's on the back burner for now, as this is my main focus. And then the other thing that I'm working on is I've actually started it way back in 2023. It's been difficult to finish because of procrastination, as well as just the resistance of, revisiting the experiences necessary to write about. And that is a book called When the Soul Screams. And that is specifically about a psychotic break that I had back in 2018, which totally upended my life. And it took me 1.5 years to taper off of the medications, as well as, reclaim a sense of autonomy over my mind and my emotions. And then after that, my physical health just bottomed out because I had dealt with the consequences of the medications having side effects on my gut and my metabolism. Combined that with really restrictive vegan dieting, and my body just was like, no, can't do this anymore. And it took me another 1.5 years. It wasn't until mid-2021 that I was physically well enough to be able to actually work full time. So that itself, the whole physical health arc, is its own thing. And, that's an ongoing process that I'm still dealing with today as a result of all of that happening. So that's what I'm working on. A lot of different moving parts right now. And I'm really I was in a major rut this year, and that was largely because I just was in total survival mode for most of it. I was unemployed because I got laid off from my last job back in October of 2024. So I was job searching for almost 6 months. And it wasn't until March of this year that I landed a job at a roofing company. And that ended up being one of the most difficult, miserable experiences of my life. And I actually almost lost my right pinky on the first day because it just got jammed right into the metal and sliced it like a filleted fish almost immediately within just a few hours of showing up on the job. And so from March until September, it was just waking up at 4:30, being totally exhausted, and I started dealing with like suicidal thoughts during the summer, and I actually had to start going back to therapy through BetterHelp. As someone who benefited immensely during my recovery from my psychosis with in-person therapy for almost 2 years, BetterHelp is useful, but it's not nowhere close. Like it is not the same thing as in-person therapy. It was very helpful for me because I knew what I needed to get out of it. I just needed a second opinion, and I needed someone to get me out of my head. And what we determined is that I didn't actually have a longing or a desire to kill myself. It was more so I was just so utterly stressed and burnt out that my nervous system was just pushing this stimuli to me that I just needed to, fix the situation and get out of it. And the thoughts themselves were more just like flashes of imagery of, you know, suicidal actions. It wasn't like this ruminating, planning, and all of the things that you would normally associate with people who are actively suicidal, which is great because I was a little freaked out when I was having these thoughts, and it was great to have a professional come in and actually explain the difference between intrusive thoughts and suicidal thoughts. And so there was a huge difference, it turns out. So anywho, I've been rambling on a little bit, but I will just, finish this up by going through one of the other issues, lastly, in this book, and that is the screen addiction. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but I think rather than just making this video go on even further, I'm just going to end on a poem about screen addiction. My mind wanders like a dog without a leash, impulsively leaping at every moving thing it sees. I try to hone my focus and put on mental blinders to block out all distractions, but I'm always overwhelmed by an innate attraction for fleeting bursts of novelty. Whatever happened to my attention span? What force is really in command that drives me to escape the task at hand? What's the motivation, the causation? What are the implications of my impatience? Has my iPhone been training me like a Pavlovian dog to salivate at the sound of notifications going off? Whether it's a deafening ringtone or a subtle vibrating buzz, the effect is instantaneous. A cessation of concentration, my train of thought derailed. But it's not just me. Look up from your screen and you'll see clearly that it's happening worldwide on a gargantuan scale. We've opened Pandora's box, and it's changed us, whether we like it or not.